Hello. Welcome to the Goodwill Cxunting podcast. I didn't make a podcast last week because my cousins were here. So I had one cousin who is 17 come from she was here for a week. So she was here from Saturday to Saturday. Then I had 3 hours turnaround to change the bedding and everything. And then my other cousin arrived and she is 21, 20 or 21, 21. She's coming 21. And she was here for 3 days. So yeah, I did not have time to make a podcast, to be honest. I didn't have time to do anything really other than have fun. But this week I thought I would talk a little bit about a couple of things. The first thing is hanging out with my younger cousins was crazy because it was sad, to be honest, because I realized that everything that I talk about on TikTok, that I've written about in my book, and that I talk about in this podcast, which is, violence against women and girls, not that I thought it was getting better, but it's arguably getting worse. And my cousin, who is 17 in particular, has had some crazy experiences with boys and men. And it's just really upsetting because, you turn up every day trying to fight the good fight, and then you hear from a child that everything that you assume is happening is indeed happening, So yeah, I thought I'd talk a little bit about that, and I also want to talk a bit about what I'm calling middle class and violent. The word chav, do you remember that? Everyone used to call each other chav. I don't know if the actual meaning is council house and violent, or if that was just something the media used, as a joke. But I wanted to talk today about middle class and violent men, because I think it's something that we don't talk about enough, and that is where my focus is whenever it comes to violent men, is more on the middle classes, because they are the ones who uphold the structures that enable this type of violence to continue. So first things first, yes, I was hanging out with a 17-year-old, which might sound crazy, but my little cousin, is really similar to me at 17 in that she goes out all the time, she drinks and all that kind of stuff. And also she has, I hope she doesn't mind me saying this, but she has kind of been adultified by the world at quite a young age. And it was really interesting speaking to her because, she's a bit aware of this kind of stuff I talk about. She doesn't avidly follow anything I do, thank God, because it's bleak. She's a bit aware of the stuff I talk about, and we were talking a lot about male violence towards women. She's from Denmark, pretty rural Denmark, and you may not know this, but Denmark has crazy levels of femicide. Trigger warning, I'm going to be talking a lot about really horrific femicide in this podcast, so either save it for another day when you can cope with that, or buckle up because it's going to get nasty. So she was telling me about this case of a guy from her school, and she'd been at this party, right, and the guy was kicking off with his girlfriend or something like that, and she was outside speaking to this guy, trying to calm him down, and she said she just got this feeling that was leave right now, get away from him. And I've talked before about your intuition and tapping into your intuition and stuff, and I would say the women in my family are kind of, I would say hippy dippy witchy type people. We're very into intuition and vibes and picking up on things. So something told her to get away from him. The next week, and this is really horrific, so just please, if you don't want to hear it, don't listen. The next week, he killed the girl that he was dating, right? Now he's 18. Sorry, he was 17 when he did it. He killed her with a rock, and he smashed her skull so badly that she couldn't be identified. Then he put his t-shirt over her head and raped her corpse. And my cousin knew this guy and met him, and we were talking about kind of the increase in these really insane brutal murders. And we were talking about, there was a case in Scotland that I heard about, I think it went to court last week or the week before, where a man had, and this is particularly nasty as well, he had stabbed his girlfriend in the head over 10 times. He then decapitated her, left her body in the flat, and went on a cocaine binge, watched porn with her body in the flat. And neighbours started to smell the body decomposing. And my cousin and I were talking about the way that porn and really violent imagery of men towards women committing horrible violent crimes towards women is readily available to men now. especially young men, and how normalized that is. And, you know, it's something that we talk about loads in the media, and you hear people talking about it. You know, we need to get better restrictions in place for porn, and we need to get better restrictions in place for accessing these images and stuff for young men. But it really is true. When I was younger, so I'm 32, when I was younger, there was not the same level of access to this type of violent imagery. I remember people going crazy because Grand Theft Auto was a big thing, and on it, you know, you could drive around and attack women in the street. And it seems crazy to say now, but you know, those were like very obviously CGI, I know what you call it, you know, CGI type video game women, right? And the discussion then was about how bad this is, and it was obviously terrible, but it wasn't real. It wasn't really happening. Now, I do think that was a kind of gateway drug, if you will, into what we are now seeing, but it wasn't real. What we are now seeing is young men as young as like 8, as young as like 6, seeing images of women being beaten in sex, being choked out in sex, having their heads smashed in sex. It's truly, truly barbaric. And, you know, I know that we all know this is happening, and the only people who are going to be listening to my podcast are women who care about this kind of thing. So it's like I'm preaching to the choir here. But, you know, I just want to emphasize what these young boys, little boys, right, are seeing is truly horrific imagery of abuse. And the case in Glasgow, I can't remember if it was Glasgow or Scotland, but the case in Scotland, sorry, really stuck out to me because porn was part of what he did. He committed this horrible violent crime and then consumed porn. And I've spoken about it a little bit on TikTok before, but I had this really crazy gig last summer when I was like skint. And for how long was I? only did it for 2 weeks. Yeah, for 2 weeks I worked for this, like, it was a freelance gig, and I worked for this company, I suppose, that make content for coaches. You know those influencers you see and they're like, sign up to my course on this, right? But these guys did, they had different coaches. So the one I worked on most was this woman who does like autism stuff to help parents who of children with autism. But then they were like, oh, we're going to send you over the info packs for these other clients that we have. And these guys were, one of them was a porn addict coach, and the other one was like a kind of men's dating coach. And as I've said before about my novel, everything that happened in my novel has really happened in real life. I've written my novel from a journalistic kind of point of view, in the sense that everything's real. So I got like this spreadsheet with about 300 or more testimonies from people who were wanting to sign up to this, you know, anti-porn. It was a porn addiction coach, and also to this men's dating coach, and they had to put on the form to apply, quote, apply to work with them, their motivation for doing so. And I read all of these testimonies, and the amount of men out there that are addicted to porn is staggering. And you know, some of these testimonies were like, I'm a father of 3, I love my wife, but I can't stop watching porn. People are watching porn on their lunch break in the toilets at work. They are watching porn, like they're going to the bathroom and watching porn while their family are in the house. And with porn, it is literally a slippery slope. When you first start consuming porn, you might start watching, you know, just like your generic. After a while, that doesn't do it for you anymore. So you might move into something a bit more hardcore. After a while, that doesn't do it for you anymore. So then you move into bondage. Again, that doesn't do it. Then you move into S&M. Then you move into really, really depraved stuff. And before you know it, you're watching extremely violent imagery. And this can happen in the space of like a month. And it was absolutely insane reading all these testimonies. Some of the people were religious, you know, as well. And I talked before about my problems with religion, but you know, you had people who were like, I'm a good Christian man. I really want to love my wife and my children, but I can't stop this. And the prevalence of this problem, not just like porn addiction, but the way that men are consuming what women are purely as being an object to abuse, is genuinely terrifying. And we are seeing now the result of young boys having access to this with these truly insane violent crimes. And something else I was talking to my cousin about, which was quite sad obviously because she is only 17, and this really wasn't a problem when I was 17, at least I didn't experience it or in any way to the same extent. And this is something I speak to my friends about as well, is you can tell when a man consumes this type of imagery on the regular when you are being intimate with them. When you are being intimate with a man who watches this kind of porn, it's very obvious because they think that's normal. So things like choking, slapping, really degrading talk. These type of men think that this is normal, and they are going out into the world, meeting women, doing this in sex, and it's very easy to sort of just brush it off as like they're just depraved freaks and, they're just violent losers. But I do think that they are genuinely not realizing, some of them at least anyway, not realizing that this is not normal because they are seeing so much porn. Porn rewires your brain. It actually rewires your brain. There's loads of science. There's actually a really good podcast from John Ronson called The Butterfly Effect, and it's about the porn industry, and he goes into it in a bit more detail. But the more porn you consume, the more your brain thinks that that is normal. So if you have someone who has been watching this kind of imagery from like 7 years of age, it has never occurred to them that physical intimacy is anything other than this type. And so I truly do think that we are seeing this increase in these extremely violent sex crimes because of exposure to this kind of imagery from a very young age. There was a case in the courts this week in Dublin, which again, this is really barbaric, where a woman was trapped in a flat with 5 men. They accused her of stealing cocaine, and they kept her locked in the flat, and they were taking cocaine while they were attacking her. But they attacked her for I think it was a couple of days. It was a long period of time anyway. And they were doing things like hitting her with a hammer, taking running kicks at her, putting cigarettes out on her. They made their own blowtorch. I don't even know how that is. She said in her witness statement that she will never get over the smell of her own flesh burning. She had a broken skull. She had broken ribs. She had to spend weeks in hospital. They also threatened to rape her child. They said they were going to pick up her child from work and rape her. And this is what I mean, this type of premeditated violence. It's violence that is coming from somewhere that is considered, putting a hammer onto a fucking stove and heating it up and then hitting someone with it. That's considered, that's pre-thought. And I really do believe that the images that these men are growing up with are enabling this. I won't get too much into it, but I also think because cocaine was involved in the case that I'm talking about in Dublin, and it was involved in the case in Scotland as well. And all I will say on this, without getting too much into cocaine use in general, but if you are with someone in a relationship with a man who regularly takes cocaine and you have any red flags, if it is safe for you to do so, please leave that relationship, because cocaine can trigger men who are already dangerous to become inconceivably violent and inconceivably evil. The 2 cases that I've mentioned, cocaine was a big part of the level of depravity that happened. Cocaine makes people feel unstoppable. It makes them feel like, nothing will hold them back. And so when you have, in the case in Dublin, which was obviously terrible, a group of men taking it and carrying out this level of violence, it becomes a sort of, crazed mindset where there's no limit to what they can do. I've spoken before about people that I went to school with who are very evil and who have been, through the court system for what they've done to women. There was one case, this man is now in prison in Spain. You can Google him, Dylan Rogers, Dylan Rodgers. He did this. He had a drug-fueled kind of crazed binge where he locked his girlfriend in the apartment in Spain. He put cigarettes out on her. He I don't know if he sexually assaulted her. I can't actually remember, but I think he did. He tied her to the chair and beat her up over the course of a couple of days, and she only got away because she managed to untie herself while he was in the shower, and drugs were involved in that. So if you are in a relationship with someone who consumes, in particular, cocaine on the regular and has given you any red flags, especially red flags that would suggest they may be a violent person. Please, I'm begging you, leave if you can. I know you might love them. I know that, you hope that they will change, but you will never know what is going to turn that person from being your partner into being one of these men if they take coke on the regular. Cocaine is such a dangerous drug when it comes to violent men. As you'll be aware, the name of this episode is Middle Class and Violent, which is a kind of play on chav, which didn't actually mean council house and violent, but that's what people thought it meant. And it's a play on that because, like I've said at the start, I'm very interested in the way that middle class men, violent men, are perceived versus, working class or poorer men. And cocaine is a great lens through which to view that. So in my novel, there is cocaine use, and that's why it's definitely not a young adult novel, even though part of it is set in school. And the reason I wanted to write about that is because I have been around quite a lot of very wealthy men who consume insane amounts of cocaine. And when people think about cocaine, especially with relation to like violence and stuff, but usually cocaine is like for rock stars or for people on a council estate. I think the general public don't realise how many people are taking cocaine on the regular, especially men. I've seen it a lot around, like I say, middle class men. And in my novel, the character of Liam takes cocaine on the regular, and he also listens to these like alpha male podcasts all the time. And I wanted to write about that because I wanted to write about the way that middle class people get away with really high levels of drug consumption in a way that working class people just do not, and in a way that working class people are very much demonized for. When it comes to middle class people, it's sort of brushed under the carpet and we don't really either think about it or know it. And this is a very, very small excerpt, like not even a paragraph, but I just wanted to read really quickly this little section about cocaine use amongst rich guys. Henderson knocked on the door, then entered without waiting for Liam to permit him. Got any gear up here, lad? We're waiting for Craig to pick up. Liam gestured to the line which was sitting on top of his dresser, over his shoulder with his forehead, as if heading a ball behind him, and returned to put his belt on. Henderson began to recut the line, to siphon some off for himself. Decent lad, he said as he sniffed his line. Lane slapped Henderson on the back as he finished his. Aye, not too bad. They headed downstairs as Craig arrived. What I was trying to do with that scene, and Liam takes cocaine before Henderson comes up to his room as well, was to try and capture how normalised drug consumption is amongst these middle class men. And when you have a mixture of frequent drug consumption, porn addiction, or exposure to really severe images of violence towards women, and then on top of that privilege and a sense of feeling like you are unstoppable, it is a disastrous recipe for truly abhorrent violence. And I'm not saying that drugs have to be a part of it for men to be violent, but I do think that they play a role in a sort of catalyst way, in that if a man is already violent or already has a kind of violent streak, if you mix cocaine in with it, things have become a lot worse very quickly. And what happens later in the night in that scene is that Liam does become very violent. And yeah, I wanted to talk kind of, like I say, a bit about class and how violent men are perceived within class structures. I obviously talk about class quite a bit. I haven't been speaking about it as much recently on TikTok, but it is kind of one of the main themes, if not the main theme of my novel, is class, really. And the reason that I am so passionate about speaking about class in conjunction with violence against women and girls is because the people who are middle class are the ones who uphold the structures, right? So the people who are high up in the police are middle class. Politicians are, for the most part, middle class. Lawyers, judges, decision makers are all middle class. Look at someone like Jeffrey Donaldson, right? It benefits violent men to have violent men in positions of power. I feel like I always end this podcast with being like, sorry, that was a little bit bleak, but like, that's, what I talk about, isn't it, really? I hope I have given some context as to, why I think we need to put more emphasis on addressing class when we talk about violence towards women, because ultimately, of course, poorer, working class men are violent, but the people who can change the way that violence impacts women are mostly middle class men in positions of power who have the means to do so. That is it for this week. Thank you so much if you've listened so far. I have mentioned it on TikTok. I have a web page, if you will, where I'm trying to get email addresses so that when I go to agents to try and get an agent to sign me in order to get my book published, if I have an email list, it really helps. So if you have a couple of seconds, please do go onto my TikTok page and you'll see the link in bio or whatever you call it, and it says support my shit in all caps. All you need to do is put your email address in there. It helps me massively with trying to get a book deal. I've kind of put my life on hold. I'm really not trying to make plans to do anything quote fun, until like the end of September, because I just want to put all my time and energy into trying to get a book deal. It's really all I care about at the moment. The themes of my book, like I say, are everything I talk about on here, and I know from engagement on TikTok that there is space for this novel. I will probably talk a little bit more about it, maybe on like the 5th or 6th episode of this. I might do a little bit of a deep dive into the plot and stuff like that. But yes, please do, if you can, give me your email address for my mailing list. And that is it for this week. Have a gorgeous week. Stay safe. Keep cunting. Bye.